The Iraqi
Capital
government
punishment in Iraq
dramatically
has a
increased
long
the
and
scale and
complex
pace of
history,
unlawful
dating back to the
executions in
Ottoman Empire's control over
2024.
Mesopotamian
Authorities
territories.
are carrying
Under
out these
Ottoman rule,
executions without prior
executions were
notice
carried
to
out for
lawyers or
various
family
crimes,
members,
including
and
murder,
despite credible
treason, and
allegations
crimes
of
against
torture
public
and
order.
violations of
The
the
city
right
of
to a
Mosul,
fair
located
trial.
in northern
While
Mesopotamia
Iraq
along
has
the Tigris
ratified
River,
the International
served as a major
Covenant on Civil
administrative
and
and
Political
commercial center
Rights
under
in
Ottoman
19
rule. Abboud and Khajawa were an Iraqi husband and wife who became two of the most notorious criminals in the region's history during the devastating famine of 1917. Abboud worked as a laborer in Mosul's markets while his wife Khajawa managed their modest household. The couple lived in a poor district of the city with their young son, struggling to make ends meet even before the crisis that would transform them into cannibalistic killers. They were known to their neighbors as a quiet family who kept to themselves, showing no early signs of the horrific crimes they would later commit. Their modest home featured a small courtyard with an old well that would later serve as a mass grave for their victims. The year 1916 brought unprecedented disaster to the region, as severe drought conditions devastated agricultural production across Mesopotamia. Rainfall levels dropped dramatically below normal levels, causing widespread crop failures and livestock deaths. The situation was compounded by the ongoing Great War, as Ottoman authorities diverted resources and manpower away from civilian needs to support military operations on multiple fronts. Supply lines were disrupted by military activities, preventing the importation of food from other regions. Local farmers abandoned their barren fields and flocked to urban centers like Mosul, hoping to find sustenance and employment, but instead adding to the overwhelming burden on already scarce resources. By early 1917, the famine had reached catastrophic proportions throughout northern Mesopotamia. The price of basic foodstuffs increased exponentially, with bread becoming a luxury item beyond the reach of common citizens. Markets that once bustled with merchants selling grains, vegetables, and meat now stood nearly empty, their shelves bare of even the most basic necessities. Desperate residents began consuming anything remotely edible, including tree bark, grass, and leather goods boiled into makeshift soups. The streets of Mosul became littered with the corpses of those who succumbed to starvation, creating additional health hazards as authorities lacked resources to properly dispose of the dead. As conditions deteriorated further, social order began to collapse in Mosul and surrounding areas. Crime rates soared as desperate people resorted to theft, robbery, and violence to obtain food or valuable items that could be traded for sustenance. Families sold their possessions, including jewelry, furniture, and even their homes, for small amounts of food that would sustain them for only days. Children wandered the streets as beggars, many of them orphaned by parents who had died of starvation or disease. The Ottoman authorities, overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis and preoccupied with military defeats, provided little assistance to the suffering civilian population. Like many residents of Mosul, Abboud and Khajawa initially tried to survive the famine through conventional means. They sold their few possessions and scavenged for any available food sources in the city. As conditions worsened, they joined other desperate residents in hunting stray animals, catching and consuming cats, dogs, and even rats to stave off starvation. The couple spent their days searching garbage heaps and abandoned buildings for anything remotely edible. Their young son, weakened by malnutrition, could barely assist in these survival efforts. The family's situation became increasingly desperate as even these alternative food sources became scarce due to competition from other starving residents. In the spring of 1917, as their situation reached a breaking point, Abboud and Khajawa made the fateful decision that would transform them from desperate famine victims into cannibalistic murderers. Their first victim was an elderly neighbor woman who lived alone and had become increasingly frail from malnutrition. The couple lured her to their home under the pretense of sharing what little food they had, then strangled her when she was defenseless. Initially hesitant about consuming human flesh, they overcame their revulsion driven by extreme hunger and desperation. However, their first experience with cannibalism proved unpleasant, as the elderly woman's tough, fatty meat made them violently ill throughout the night. Following their disturbing first murder, Khajawa made a calculated suggestion that would define their subsequent killing spree. Drawing on her knowledge of butchering practices, she proposed that they target children instead of adults, reasoning that young victims would provide more tender and palatable meat. This decision marked the beginning of their systematic targeting of Mosul's most vulnerable residents. The couple developed a methodical approach to their crimes, using their own son as an unwitting accomplice to lure
Abboud and
potential
Khajawa
victims to their
used their
home.
own son to
The
lure
child would
children
invite
home.
neighborhood children
He'd
to
bring
play,
them to play.
bringing them into the
Inside,
house where his
the door
parents would
closed,
murder them.
and death
Their killing
awaited.
method remained
They killed
consistent
the
throughout their
children
crime
swiftly.
spree. Once children were isolated in their home, Abboud and Khajawa would attack them with rocks or other blunt instruments, killing them quickly to avoid detection by neighbors. They then carefully butchered the bodies, removing all usable meat while disposing of bones and skulls in the old well in their courtyard. The couple cooked the human flesh like any other meat, seasoning it with whatever
A local
spices they could
stew.
obtain.
They ate
They
some,
even fed
but
portions
most
of human
they
meat to their own
sold
son,
at markets,
who remained
to
unaware of the
friends,
true source of their
neighbors,
improved
even
diet
to
during the
local
famine.
soldiers.
As
The
their
pe-
confidence grew and their method proved successful, Abboud and Khajawa became increasingly bold in their operations. They expanded their victim selection beyond their immediate neighborhood, sometimes targeting multiple children from the same family. The couple maintained a facade of normalcy, avoiding suspicious behavior that might alert authorities or neighbors to their activities. Their improved physical condition during the height of the famine, when others were wasting away, should have raised questions but went unnoticed in the chaos of the crisis. The number of their victims continued to climb as they perfected their predatory techniques. Emboldened by their success and finding themselves with more human meat than they could consume, Abboud and Khajawa made the audacious decision to open a small restaurant. They presented their establishment as serving traditional
local
Iraqi
stew.
dishes,
They ate some,
particularly
but
claiming to
most
offer high-quality
they sold
mutton
at
prepared with local
markets,
spices.
to friends,
The restaurant
neighbors,
quickly became
even to
popular
local
among Mosul's
soldiers.
residents who had been deprived of meat for months during the famine. Customers praised the quality and flavor of the meat, never suspecting its true origin. The couple's business thrived as desperate residents spent their limited resources on what they believed was a rare opportunity to eat proper meat during the crisis. Their criminal enterprise continued successfully for several months until they encountered an experienced butcher who possessed the knowledge to identify their deception. This butcher, familiar with various types of meat from years of professional experience, immediately recognized that the supposed mutton being served had unusual characteristics. Upon closer examination of the bones and meat texture, he realized with horror that he was being served human flesh, specifically what appeared to be a
He runs
child's
out of his
hand.
house, flags down
Rather
an
than
Ottoman
confronting the
policeman,
couple
and
directly,
informs them
the
of what
astute
just
butcher
happened.
carefully preserved
The policeman
evidence
was
of their
skeptical,
crime
yet
and reported
followed
his
the man
discovery
back
to
his
local
house to
authorities.
investigate.
The
And to his
investigation that
shock, there
followed
was
the butcher's
severed
report
finger on
led
the
to the
table
swift
near the
arrest of
stew.
Abboud and
He
Khajawa.
immediately rushed to
When
inform his
authorities
officer,
searched their
and
home,
a squad was
they made the
dispatched to
gruesome
Abboud's
discovery
house.
of the old well filled with approximately 100 skulls belonging to children of various ages. The scale of their crimes shocked even hardened investigators who had witnessed the brutality of wartime. During interrogation, Khajawa broke down and provided a detailed confession of their activities, describing how desperation during the famine had driven them to murder and cannibalism. Her testimony revealed the systematic nature of their crimes and the involvement of their own son as an unwitting accomplice. The confession provided by Khajawa during police interrogation was so horrific that investigators initially struggled to believe the full extent of the couple's crimes. She described in detail how they had progressed from eating stray animals to murdering their elderly neighbor, and finally to their systematic targeting of children. When asked by the governor how many children they had killed, Khajawa responded that she could not remember the exact number, but that the skulls in the well could provide an accurate count. Her matter-of-fact description of their methods and victim selection criteria demonstrated a level of calculation that went beyond mere survival instinct. During questioning, the governor asked Khajawa to explain their progression into cannibalism. She responded, "We endured unbearable hunger during the siege. We finally agreed to eat cats, and we kept catching and eating them until our street ran out of them. Then we began eating dogs until they ran out too, and dog flesh tasted much better than cat meat. When there was nothing left to eat, we tried human flesh." When pressed about their first victim, she explained, "An old woman who we strangled and cooked in a large pot, but we spent all night vomiting because her flesh was so fatty." The trial of Abboud and Khajawa proceeded quickly, given the overwhelming evidence against them and Khajawa's detailed confession. The Ottoman court system, already strained by wartime conditions, expedited their case due to the severity and public nature of their crimes. Local residents, many of whom had unknowingly consumed human flesh at the couple's restaurant, demanded swift justice. The discovery that some families had lost multiple children to the murderous couple intensified public outrage. During the proceedings, Khajawa showed some remorse for their actions, while Abboud remained defiant, arguing that government failures during the famine had forced them into their criminal behavior. The court found both defendants guilty of multiple counts of murder and sentenced them to death by hanging, the standard method of execution under Ottoman law. The sentence was to be carried out publicly in Baghdad's Bab al-Azab Square, a traditional location for executions that would maximize public attendance and serve as a deterrent to others. On the morning of their execution, Abboud and Khajawa were transported to Bab al-Azab Square on donkeys, a traditional method of conveying condemned prisoners to their place of execution. Large crowds had gathered to witness the hanging of the infamous couple, with many spectators expressing their anger and disgust at the crimes. During the journey to the execution site, angry bystanders cursed, spat at, and physically assaulted the prisoners. One grieving mother, whose 3 children had been among the victims, bit off one of Khajawa's toes in an act of revenge, causing her to scream in pain and apologize profusely for her crimes. Throughout the ordeal, the couple displayed contrasting attitudes toward their fate. Khajawa, bloodied and distressed from the crowd's violence, continued to express remorse and beg forgiveness from the families of her victims. In contrast, Abboud remained unrepentant, cursing the crowd and arguing that the government's inadequate response to the famine had driven them to cannibalism. He maintained that authorities should be blamed for creating conditions that forced ordinary citizens to resort to such desperate measures. His defiant attitude only further enraged the crowd, who viewed his justifications as an insult to the memory of the innocent children they had murdered. The execution took place in Bab al-Azab Square, where makeshift gallows had been erected for the occasion. Both Abboud and Khajawa were hanged simultaneously before the large crowd of witnesses who had gathered to see justice served. Their bodies were left hanging for several hours as a public warning before being removed by authorities. The execution marked the end of one of the most horrific crime sprees in the region's history, though the trauma of their actions continued to affect the community for years afterward. Their young son, who had unknowingly participated in luring victims to their deaths, was placed in protective custody and later relocated away from Mosul. The case of Abboud and Khajawa became a cautionary tale about how extreme circumstances can drive ordinary individuals to commit unthinkable crimes. Their story highlighted the devastating impact of famine and social collapse on human behavior, while also demonstrating the importance of maintaining social institutions and support systems during times of crisis. Contemporary accounts of their crimes were preserved in local records and passed down through oral tradition, serving as a reminder of the dark period when Mosul suffered under the dual burden of war and famine. Modern criminological studies of couples who commit crimes together have identified various factors that contribute to such partnerships, including shared desperation, mutual reinforcement of deviant behavior, and the normalization of violence within intimate relationships. The case of Abboud and Khajawa illustrates how extreme environmental pressures can transform ordinary marital relationships into criminal conspiracies, particularly when traditional social support systems collapse during times of crisis. Thank you for watching Death Chamber.